Welcome to Innovation Leadership. I'm Jess Larson. I'm excited for this episode. Good to have my friend Robyn Kirkham on the show. Robyn, you've got an incredible background from across military intelligence, law enforcement, and then killing it in business, and now working on your master's degree, all sorts of fun things. Why don't we start people off with the Robyn story?
Ooh, it's got a lot of chapters that are a little bit short and very varied. So I landed in an Army ROTC program. I come from a very Seinfeldian, non-military-esque New York family who was all about, you're going to go to law school. That's going to be the route you're going to take. And that was what I sold everybody. So I went off to school in the South and ended up snagging an Army ROTC scholarship. And it was funny because my family was like, what are you going to do in the Army? There's no Jewish boys in the Army. It was very who are you? And it was the weirdest thing because you become the black sheep. I was like, how am I the black sheep of this family? Join the military. But they just were so confused. They were like, I don't understand. So landed in our ROTC program at Tulane and ended up getting my first choice, which was Military Police Corps. And I spent a little over 4 years active duty in the MP Corps. Again, blowing the mind of my family. So I did my first tour. Let's put it this way. I did my first tour to Korea. And this is 2000. No wars in Korea. And my mom tied a yellow ribbon around the tree in the front yard. She's like, I heard this is what you're supposed to do when your troops go off. And I was like, to war, Mom. I'm going to Seoul. But this is the family background that I came from. So it started off super unusual in that respect. So I went off and did the Army thing for a while. Really loved the Army, but I was a little bit more of an out-of-the-box thinker. I was looking for some unconventional opportunities. Got out and went over to the Coast Guard briefly as a law enforcement officer, a federal agent with the Coast Guard, which is a great outfit, by the way. It's the ultimate secret. So if you ever have children that desire to go into some Naval Academy, Army situation, send them to the Coast Guard. Because as a mom, I'm like, the Coast Guard, yes. And they're near water. So as long as you don't end up in an icebreaker somewhere, you're great. So went off to the Coast Guard. And while I was getting initiated into the Coast Guard as a civilian, I got picked up by the CIA as a case officer, as an operations officer. So that was a very long process. And so I spent about a year with the Coast Guard and then switched over to the CIA. And I spent about 8 years with the CIA. And then got out and went back to law enforcement and was actually a federal agent with the Bureau of Land Management, which was the biggest joke. Everyone was like, yeah, sure. You're leaving the CIA to go to the BLM. I'm like, have you seen BLM land? Not a lot of access to intelligence going on BLM land. Not a great cover story, guys. I really, truly am just changing gears. We had kids, different needs. Went over to the BLM, worked as a BLM agent for about 5 years, and then decided to walk away from the government altogether. And went over to business. We had been one of the original partners in Black Rifle Coffee. And at that point, they were just at a really big pivotal point. And so the CEO over there, Evan, had asked if I could come on board with the executive team originally to do business intelligence. Next thing you know, I'm the COO and, I'm managing, fulfillment and roasting and printing and shipping and receiving and distribution. It was all and customer service. And I was like, how in the world did I get here? But I faked it till I made it in other places and we're fairly successful. So I did that for a little over a year. And then when Black Rifle pivoted to Texas, we stayed in Utah and they had acquired a different coffee company. And I moved over to that. And I was the COO of that company for about 3 or 4 years. And then decided overall that corporate supply chain management just wasn't my jam. And went back over to the security industry. And I spent about 4 years in the private security industry working on physical, cyber, and investigative security, mostly for C-suites and high net worth clients. And then I finally threw my hands up. And you are now talking to a recovering type AAA, overachieving, mildly people-pleasing person who is on the road to recovery. So I got on the journey for family and mental health and just started to realize that I'd done wonderful things, but had kind of sold short some other aspects of my life. And I stepped back and in a very slow process, I went from part-time work to full-time school Then I finally walked away from work altogether. And now I am a full-time student. And then I still run our small businesses and I run our family and everything else. So I like to say I'm on sabbatical because saying unemployed makes me feel bad about myself, but I'm getting better at that. See, that's part of the road to recovery, right? It's all about words. So I am unemployed, except I run a bunch of small businesses. So I'm like, maybe I'm not so unemployed, but I'm like I'm the busiest unemployed person you've ever met. So I feel good about that. And again, that's part of my recovery of being a type AAA overachiever. So
Yeah. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about your degree. Let's talk about Mustang medicine.
yeah. So about 3 years ago, my husband, Jeff Kirkham, who I believe is on your show or will be on your show very soon, we fell into an interesting group of people that were looking to take emotional mental health and kind of connect it back to all of these biochemical, physiological aspects and the science of mental health. You've got guys out there like Huberman, like Andrew Huberman, is championing the knowledge of science to help mental health. And that's, not all he does, but a lot of his podcasts kind of fall in that realm. You've got a lot of, big players out there that are talking about how the body keeps score, how mental health and physical health are so intertwined, how gut health and mental health are so intertwined. And, there's a lot of people in the emotional mental health space that maybe just don't have that background in stress management and nervous system regulation. And my husband, having come from being, a retired special forces guy and then pivoted at the age of 50 and decided to go back to school for nursing, had that. And they asked him to come in initially to kind of teach stress management and nervous system regulation at a retreat under the banner of Mustang medicine. And so it was kind of the first rewilding retreat. And he came back and he was like, I went to this thing. It was mind blowing. We did this breathing thing that was really hard. And I was like, it's breathing. I don't understand. And so he's like, you got to come. So I came as an attendee, the next one. And then I came as an attendee and a support staff. And then I came as an attendee and support staff bigger. And then we just completed our 20th rewilding under Mustang medicine. And I am a full facilitator. We have advanced the curriculum. We now have 3 books. We just finished the 4th book that kind of brings all the curriculum and the glossary and the journaling all together into one place. And it changed my life. I didn't know I even needed to be on the journey, which I guess is like knowing is half the battle, right? And I got on the journey to just improve my mental health and just be bigger, better, smarter, faster, stronger, only to come to find out that like, oh, wow, a lot of these traits that I have that make me, and I'm going to sound like wildly successful in the jobs that I've had, are not necessarily making me successful in some of the other more important areas of my life, particularly in the family realm and the parenting realm and a few other places. And at some point it stopped serving me. It was like, I needed a lot of those, drives to get me through those early years, to break barriers, to jump from jobs, like these amazing jobs, and to get into places like the CIA and to, help Black Rifle Coffee on its trajectory to ultimately becoming, a $1 billion privately held or a publicly held company. But all of a sudden you hit your, mid to late 40s and you're like, maybe I don't need to be on that path. Maybe there's some things I can do. Maybe I need to unravel the negative and the positive behaviors, or the negative behaviors that had really good positive outcomes, and replace those with positive behaviors that will have positive outcomes. And every rewilding I went to, the first couple made me realize that although I've been really strong in the security industry, I have a lot of experience in the intelligence and the law enforcement world, that I was done. It wasn't filling my cup anymore. And so, you get excited and you're like, what's next? I'm an overachiever. Like, what's next? I got to do it now. And I kept going to these rewildings, hoping I would get that like flash. And instead, I started to get antsy. What's the next thing? And it dawned on me that the rewildings and the retreats and the facilitation and the just all of the mental health stuff was actually putting blank pages in my next chapter, because I needed to be ready for whatever the content was going to be. And I wasn't ready because I didn't know myself. I didn't know who I wanted to be heading into my 50s. And I just started putting a lot of blank pages in my book. And I was like, the content will come when it's ready. And then about rewilding 8, I had this epiphany that I needed to go back to school. And it was like, whatever is going to be next, you need to be more educated in it, whatever it is, which was the hard part. Because then I spent 6 months looking at programs and doing all these things. So that led me to the degree program that I'm just completing, which is a master's in cyber psychology. And everyone goes, that sounds really cool. What is that? That's the look on your face. That sounds great, but what the heck is it? There is like one program in the country that teaches it. It's at Norfolk State. It's a remote program. And it takes all of the aspects of what a master's of psychology would be. Everything from cognition and behavior to media and consumer psychology to forensic psychology, abnormal psych, but it puts it all through the lens of cyberspace. So it asks us, how is being in cyberspace and using cyber technology impacting, for the better or worse, all of these different aspects of our lives? How is our memory and cognition changing? How are we thinking differently now that we have all these pneumatic devices that are helping us remember stuff? I mean, how many phone numbers do you have in your mental Rolodex now? Versus, 20 years ago. How many places can you get to without maps now? I remember having a triptych, like a printed triptych with the yellow line when I wanted to drive across the country, and, the little piece of paper and an atlas, and so all of these things. And, has that just given us more space in our brains, though, to know more important stuff or different stuff? So there's a lot of debate, and there's obviously a lot of unknowns about how our mental health is being impacted by the rapid introduction of all of this cyber technology, virtual reality, augmented reality, text versus direct communication. So we're really in a catch-up phase. And I kept picturing like we're in an epic, right? This is the print. This is fire. This is the wheel. Like cyber technology is humanity changing. And the wave is coming really fast and it's hitting us a little bit harder than we expected, and we're not ready for it. And I don't think we should go backwards. I just think that the people in this field, the cyber psychology field, need to catch up, and more attention needs to be paid to the long-term mental health aspects and mental processes aspect of introducing cyber devices. And so, boom.
Well, if that's not enough, we need to talk about the movie.
Oh my gosh. Yes. So I went to the movie last night. So my husband and his business partner, Jason Ross, they wrote a series of books called Black Autumn. There's now 9 books in the series plus 2 sub-books. And they got picked up by Angel Studios. And Angel Studios turned the first book into a movie called Homestead, which launched in theaters yesterday. So we actually were down in Provo, Utah I bought 100 tickets. We had 35 people down there. We have another theater near our house on Saturday, but it launched nationwide. So if you haven't seen it, go see it. We're hoping to get enough butts and seats this first week to to keep it through the holidays in the theaters. But it is a post-apocalyptic drama about a series of black swan events that essentially set the United States into an apocalypse, essentially. Brownouts and rolling blackouts, civil unrest. And it kind of talks about this place in Utah where families who have been preparing get together to try to figure out like how to ride it out. But with the introduction of Angel Studios, it's overlaid a lot with just like crisis of consciousness, moral compass, faith. How do all those things get tested in a true apocalyptic environment? My husband's experience, my experience, coupled with Jason's, all kind of came together to really create a true feeling of like what it would be like. And at first people are like, that's just, you guys went a little overboard. And it's like, actually, no, when we sit down and we truly map out how quickly things will go south, based on medication and the limitations of how much food people have and how reliant we are on power and the power grid, it actually will go downhill kind of quick. So, it does have a positive, undertone, but it's a little heavy and very expensive. So I'm going to warn you, the movie itself is not expensive. But when you get done reading the book or watching the movie, you'll get on Amazon and you're going to start buying all this stuff. All the go kits and the medical bags. And yeah, every book I read became more and more expensive. I was like, all right, I'm going to go buy all this stuff now and be ready. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you look at Jeff's career, undercover DEA, 28 years, Green Beret, working for classified counterterrorism unit, all these different things. When he first told you he was going to write a book, at what point did you start, like, as the books were going, at what point did you start to get the sense, like, I mean, now 700,000 copies sold, you know, most people get pretty excited about 1,000 copies sold with, how few books break out these days, right? At what point watching this like book series progression where you're like, holy cow, this is a
This is the
thing.
thing. So, we always say keep the Kirkhams weird. Um, so like my husband has 8 patents. Like like literally we sit in a restaurant, he pulls out a pen and pencil, starts like doodling on a napkin, and 3 years later we have like a medical device company. Like it's just how it goes because he has a vision to be able to take something from a piece of paper all the way across the finish line to sales, which, lots of people have great ideas and just don't know how to get them to prototype. A lot of people have great prototypes that they can't get to market. A lot of people bring things to market and they can't get them sold. Jeff just has that. And as a partnership together, we can do that, and it's a skill and it's a passion. So when the book started coming out and Jason started lighting that fire underneath himself, because Jason is a phenomenally successful business person. And also, we think weird is cool. I tell my kids, like, weird is cool. Elon Musk is weird. Jeff Bezos was probably weird. Like, so it's okay to be weird. When the first book came out, I was like, huh. But when the second and third and fourth, and like the story just kept going. And oddly enough, several of the sub stories were premonitions. So like one of book 2 talks about a very unfortunate incident that happens on the border with some missionaries that are living there. And literally 3 months after the book comes out, a sad incident happened in real life with some missionaries on the border being killed by the Mexican cartel. So it's as real as it can be because so Jeff and I, when we were pre-kids, when we were early in our relationship and we were both working for the government, for the big G, we would go running. And that's the game we used to play. If I was a terrorist, what would I do? I know, again, keep us weird. So we would go running in DC, in Virginia on the WNOD trail. It's this like never ending bike trail. And we would look at all the power lines, and we'd go, and that was right after the DC sniper situation that had come through and a couple other small incidences. And we were like, what would we do if we were a terrorist? And we would roll through that entire like process because it's really, know your enemy, right? And so that was a lot of the process of making the books, was bringing together all of these what if scenarios that we used to do anyway. And, Jeff will tell you that him and Jason kind of started this as an exercise of what if. So what if this happens? What would we do? And it's that preparedness mentality. So to get back to your original question, I am not surprised, but I'm also amazed. Like I watched the movie yesterday with all of Jeff's siblings and his parents and a couple other friends and family. And it was so cool to just see all of it in the big screen, like legit, it's a legit movie. And then to see like, based on a book written by Jeff Kirkham and Jason Ross and then see our names in the, at the end. So it was neat. Like it was really neat.
That's so fun. I actually have a different Green Beret friend, former client who, after getting out of Army Special Forces, went and worked for a government agency that does nothing but try to break into other government facilities and test their ability to withstand terrorist attacks. And like, that's literally his full-time job now.
Yeah. I mean, it's a thing. And those kind of people, like, that's what you do. You like walk around and you look at things and go, if I was the bad guy, how would I, and so when I left Black Rifle and went over to the private security world, that's a lot of what we did. Risks, threat, vulnerability, and risk assessments, where we would go out to businesses, large homes, estates, and things like that. And basically, red drill it. We'd go out and look at the home or look at the facility and say, if I was a bad guy, this is how I would approach your house. What kind of bad guy are you most likely to encounter? Because that's a big thing. Like, are you going to have like, Chinese operatives fast roping down from a helicopter onto your rooftop kind of bad? Or are we talking more likely just, the neighborhood, meth head who's going to try to break into your house to steal something? So like, know your enemy, know what you're most likely to encounter, and then how would they most likely defeat your existing security? And then how do you defeat them? And that's really the approach that we always take. And to try to get into that mindset when we go to somebody's home and work from like kind of the outside in, the bubbles, the layers of security. And I enjoy that. To me, that's like a challenge, because I'm always like, so if I was the bad guy, what kind of bad guy? And I put different bad guy hats on. Am I the opportunist bad guy that's really just looking to smash and grab? Or am I a counterintelligence bad guy who's actually looking to get your computer and documents or anything like that? And those are obviously different skill sets.
Yeah. Well, I remember Jeff taking me down to the Black Rifle locations in the early days, and as some guys he used to work with from Afghanistan, they're folding t-shirts that day and getting ready stuff, and like it was like a buzzing place. Can you talk to us about some of the decisions made in those early days of Black Rifle that you think helped set up for it to become this $1 billion success story?
Definitely. Evan had a vision. Like I remember so Evan and Jeff started with a completely different small company idea. And it was to make a Kickstarter type of platform that would allow the type of things that you can't have on Kickstarter. To allow the edged weapons and not guns themselves, but gun parts and things like that. Things that are just not allowed on a Kickstarter type or Indiegogo type platform. And, they learned the lessons of development. Their part of it went swimmingly well. The hard part was the dev side on the back end and the platform side. So we got a really good education on how hard it is to do tech. And then that folded into a relationship with Jason, the co-author of Black Autumn, with a company called Ready Man, which was preparedness with content and so that's really where we all started to cut our teeth on the social media aspect of things and the content and the podcasts and videos and how important having videos out there in this type of world is. And Evan kept talking about this coffee idea. And finally he was like, it was right about the time that he was moving down here. He was staying with us for a few months, but he's like, I want to give this coffee thing a try. He has a love of coffee and a passion, but then he also started to really understand the psychology of social media. It was 2012-ish. So there were certain things that were, or 2012, 2013, somewhere around there. The internet was still wide open. Facebook was still wide open. You could buy a Facebook ad space for pennies on the dollar. And he just took his love of coffee, his knowledge of social media, and kind of his ruggedness, and just threw it all together with a bunch of people that were used to killing ISIS, hard worker, type A, go kind of people. And they just ran head first, head down through everything. And so that was a bit of the mentality, and so it wasn't always precision. Again, we didn't necessarily have a whole bunch of corporate people who were like, well, last time I did this in Clorox, or when I did this at, this CPG food company, it was more just like, I know how to conquer shit. Sorry. I know how to conquer stuff. I know how to accomplish things. There was a lot of cursing that went on at Black Rifle. It was definitely not your typical boardroom, and it was just like, put your head down and run through the brick wall and we will get there. And Evan did. And his big thing was, other veteran companies are going to catch up to us. Other veteran companies are going to start let's get as far downfield, or other, not even just veteran, but 2A, first responder, coffee companies are going to nip at our heels. So let's get as far down the field as we can, so we own as much of the market space as possible. And he kept saying, the coffee market space is enormous. We only need to own this much of it, and that's it. And so he really stuck to his guns, and he didn't water down his message. And it came back sometimes to bite us in the butt. Sometimes the message, even in our own community, wasn't well received. But he stuck to his guns, and he didn't water down the message, and he didn't become too centrist. And as a result of that, he created a really strong brand loyalty that was undying. And I always said to people, look, people don't run around and wear Black Rifle Coffee t-shirts because they love coffee. Nobody's wearing their BRCC t-shirt to let everyone know, I like medium dark, They're wearing it because they want you to know what it means about them. And that they are a certain person, they will have a certain ethos. And it was funny because when I was working for the company, I would fly a lot and I would rep the brand. I always wore my BRCC stuff. And I would go to get on the plane, and no less than 2 to 3 people would make eye contact, and they'd say, oh, I bought that from my uncle. Or, hey, I've got a sweatshirt. And it was like, they were telling me, me, you, same. Or if a terrorist gets on this plane, it's me and you. and I had pilots that would say something to me. And like, it was a special breed of people. And it was definitely an iconic, like identity shaping brand. And I think that it was huge. Having a brand that meant something, like not just so people felt like they were buying an expensive bag of coffee, considering most of our people had pretty rough palates. They were drinking Folgers and had just started to step up in the game, maybe a little bit. And so now we're asking them to buy, a $15 to $18 bag of good coffee. And I think what it meant to them and what it meant to give back was definitely a big part of it. So brand loyalty, brand awareness, and brand concentration, like not watering down the brand, even as we got bigger. And that was hard because there were definitely people on the outside, venture capitalists, money people who were like, well, I don't know if you can say that. And you might have to tone down the videos a little bit or get a little bit less racy or use a few less F-bombs, and, the team kind of was like, maybe, but maybe not, and they weathered the storm. They took a few, like every company that's out there on the edge, they took some hits, but they've weathered the storm.
I am so fascinated by the people who have the guts not to water things down. Look at Liquid Death, the water company. Oh my gosh. Those early cartoons where it's like, think about like the craziest thing the metal bands did in the early 80s. And it's like that, but worse.
And that's why people bought cans of water. Yeah, people weren't running around drinking cans of water just to drink cans of water. They wanted to drink Liquid Death. My kids thought the cans were the coolest thing ever. And we had gotten a few, and I told them, I was like, well, no, that's not water, that's alcohol. You can't drink that. So I could keep the cans for myself. And then they finally were like, Mom, that's not true. We read the can. It's water. But yeah, there's something to be said for that, especially right now. Like, you can have a brand that has no politics, and that is totally fine. And, we ran afoul. So like we ran across that with our other coffee company that had no politics. It was a very wonderful company that was dedicated to pet rescue. And like every dime that we could spare went to pet rescue. We were 100% behind everything that we said regarding our advocacy of pet rescue. Every pet deserves a second chance. So it was trying to sponsor primarily dogs so that they don't end up in kill shelters and things like that, but no politics. And there were times where the company was trying to pull us into politics. Just, where's your stance on this? And the company was like, we're here to save dogs. We're here to save dogs. Like, if you want a company that has an opinion about that matter, that's not us. We don't have an opinion. Like, we're here to save dogs. And they really were rigid on like, this is who we are, because you start getting pulled and people want you to weigh in on stuff that has nothing to do with coffee and nothing to do with pet rescue. And, the CEO at the time really kept on message and just weathered that storm, because people were like, well, if you don't have a say on the BLM movement, then no say is essentially like non-compliance. Like, and it was like, well, no, it's not that we don't have a personal opinion, but the company is focused on pet rescue, and every post that we put out that doesn't talk about pet rescue, a dog dies. And that was kind of their way of looking at it. But it was challenging because everybody wanted you to dive into politics. And so, whereas Evan was the reverse, he's like, I am in politics 100%, but this is my message and I'm sticking to it.
It's interesting to think about the tough thing of like that decision point where you can fall off the balance beam either way, right? You can not take enough feedback, like from your own community, and mess it up that way and lose your people. Or you can take too much feedback from the people who aren't in your community and aren't your customers, and then lose your customers that way. When you do fall off, how to get back on, how to get back on that balance beam as soon as possible, how to not far too far off if you fell off, and the nature of the unknowable future. Like, if all we needed was the past, we could all drive from our rearview mirrors, right?
And I think one of the big things that I was able to take with me from the intelligence community to the business community was particularly, so my time in law enforcement, I spent quite a bit of time in the online undercover world, in the dregs of social media, chasing bad people, saying and doing and wanting to be, and facilitating bad things online, bad physical things in the real world online. And, I learned very quickly to be able to decipher what is truly the voice of the people that believe in your message and what are just the loud, squeaky wheels. And so from a business perspective, how much are those squeaky wheels really, how much do they equate to in terms of lifetime value of a customer and sales versus the true, bulwark, like the bulk of your people? Where are they? And it was very similar in the intelligence community. We'd get a message or we'd get some intelligence report, and in confirming, is it cyclic? So is it the same report or same person regurgitating it through 16 other different sub entities? And it's actually just one incident, one person, one voice, or one small group that has now megaphoned itself further out? Or does it truly reflect, a bigger percentage of people? Is this a bigger problem? And that's where consumer psychology comes in. And that's where knowing your base, knowing the information, knowing the analytics of how your people generally respond and the demographics of who they are and understanding them as people, you can figure out very quickly whether or not this issue is going to reverberate deeper into your client and customer pool. And that is exactly how it works also on the intel and law enforcement side. Is this squeaky wheel loud enough and impactful enough to actually affect the broader base? Or is this really just that? And if I shave off that top layer, everybody below is sort of like, whatever, or not that concerned, because they like to spin people up. And then we spend a whole lot of time chasing ghosts and chasing a couple loud people that just aren't worth chasing.
Makes sense. I want to talk about this, the intersection of intel and law enforcement. At our charity, Child Rescue Association, which you've been so great to give us good advice on in the past, this program that we're now finally actually getting ready to film the first videos for and make the in-person class of teaching, law enforcement who are going up against organized crime, whether that's mafia cartels, gangs like Bloods and Crips, MS-13, who've been caught trafficking children and women in our country. Trying to teach them some of these human intelligence skills of how can they recruit a source high up in this organized crime group and someone who could give them, tip after tip after tip for years and not just do a one and done, but, save a lot of kids over time. When you think about teaching an unclassified version of a course like that to law enforcement, what's one of the tougher things you think we will have with these officers who've been, trained in regular cop stuff, and now this is a new skill set, maybe a new mindset for some of them?
Judgment. We are very judgmental in terms of who we associate with and who we befriend and how we have a hard time in law enforcement and in intelligence, but more in law enforcement, us versus them, good guys versus bad guys, the value of people. And so one of the things I learned, I served in the war zones with the agency, and look, great, upstanding members of community rarely have really good intel. So we had a young gentleman who had been recruited to be a suicide bomber, and he was handed his vest and given his directions, and he valued his life more than he valued going on into paradise. And he showed up at our gate with his suicide vest, which didn't go so well. He got a little shakedown, understandably. But long story short, he showed up. Vest went one way. He came to me because I was in the hopper at that time, and that was my skill set. And which was interesting because it's a very cultural shift there. He wouldn't face me. We had to deal. And you can imagine a guy where his mental state would be if he felt like he was recruited to be a suicide bomber. So angry and disgruntled and now lost and about to sell out his God and his country and his people and all these things. But yet he was like, I want to live, but I'm kind of, the things that I wanted to live for weren't that great, and which is why I signed on to begin with. So it was a lot of psychology. But this is a guy who was had the day before been a little bit better for him, would have blown up American soldiers. But yet here we are. And I'm like, me, you, same, buddy. And like just having to find a thread of decency in his life and just having to be able to stomach and be an interaction with him. And in this case, I certainly did disdain him. But at some point I came to a realization that like, I mean, the kid was like 18 and I'm like, oh, like what life have we been living, friend? You know, and so you find a little bit of empathy. You find whatever you need to find to treat this person with an ounce of dignity and respect so that you can recruit them.
Can you give people an example? Because you're not the first intelligence officer to talk about this. Of like, you know, I have a different friend who was working with a guy who had a hostage full of elementary school kids on a bus that, you know, he was going to harm. And he said the same thing to me. He says like, I just worked really hard until I could find the humanity within him. And then I didn't talk to the guy with a bus full of kids. I talked to the humanity that I had found. And that's how he said he got through to that guy. In your story you just told, or ones like that, what's an example of what the humanity looked like to you, or the thread?
So in this particular kid, like the way he looked at me with so much, first it was like, ugh. And then like, but he kept looking, he kept looking. And I was like, he's curious. And all of a sudden it was like, oh, he has a curiosity. Like he has realized that there is a whole wide world out there that somebody has purposely kept him from. Like he has been purposely kept from the potential of all that's out there so that they could train him, funnel him into this very dead-end job, no pun intended, and it was like he looked around and you could kind of see, and I was like, he's a kid. Like in this case, he's a kid. Like he's 18 and he's a grown man and he's making grown adult choices. But like from a humanity perspective, I was like, what would his life have been if he had grown up differently? And I think and we can do that a lot with people on the streets. Everybody's got a wounded story. And it's interesting now because having gone through now my mental health, like the health and wellness space, I can see the humanity in almost everybody because I can see the trauma story and I can see the core wounds. And I can see like, how does a guy get so core wounded that he goes, my only value is to blow myself up and take other innocent people with me. And he doesn't see that them as innocent and but like, how does somebody get there? And so that's that thread where you just look at, and everything bad has a good, like you have to balance everything out, right? So at the end of the day, I can now take this person who was going to blow himself up, who didn't. So there's some humanity there, like, thank you. And go, we can now wield you as a weapon for good. And so even if you can't, because I worked with some really distasteful people. And so in that case, I had to step back and go, but in my head, you are a tool you are a weapon of good. Like you are a weapon of good. And as long as I can wield that weapon in a positive way that's going to save a child, save humanity in some way, then I don't have to like you. I have to treat you with a little bit of dignity and respect because we respect all of our tools, like everything. We respect everything, right? And if you had tools in your toolbox, you would treat them with respect and you would use them smartly. So in that case, like if you truly can't stomach somebody because they are so cross-culture to what you believe in, then you look at how you can manage them in some other capacity. I worked with a guy who ran explosives across the border for IEDs. And he was an opportunist. And I am not fooling myself that he was working with me out of any level of humanity, because at one point he said to me, well, some of my explosives have to work. Otherwise I lose my validity. And I was like, don't you have a problem with that? And he's like, no. So there was no fig leaf here. Like this man was not working with me because he felt terribly guilty about blowing people up. He just realized that for every 5 things that were explosive, he could sell me 4 and keep 1 and make money across the board in all of it. And if he ever got into hot water with the USG, he could leverage, which he's not, leverage that relationship to get himself out of hot water. And in that case, I was like, okay, you are a kind of a disgusting human. Okay. But I can value what you're doing so that I can use it to benefit my people. And then there is a level of fake it till you make it. I treated him with dignity and respect. The entire time I felt like I had to take a shower and I didn't like him. And he was, At the end of the day, he saved hundreds of lives. Hundreds of lives. How do you just have to accept that. He saved hundreds of lives. Was he also involved in the death of some? Probably. But for my purposes, I was able to get him to save hundreds of lives that would not have been saved if he had not been in a relationship with me. And everyone's like, well, why don't we just take him off the playing field? Go throw him in jail. And I said, because he is part of a line that I know, like a rat line that I otherwise would then have to figure out how to infiltrate again, that is most definitely going to kill hundreds of people. So those are those gray areas that unfortunately we have to manage and figure out. And there is a lot of contention in the government over those kind of things. Is how do you deal with somebody who's a drug dealer, but he hates human trafficking? So he's willing to give you intelligence on on human trafficking, but you know full well that he is a drug dealer or a bad human. It is hard.
Yeah, no kidding. Especially when you have years or possibly decades of programming the other direction, of trying to have this black and white line, trying to stay away from, the temptations and the opportunities for corruption that, the cartel, has offered your other border guard friends, or, things like this, right? So I want to talk about something. So I would love your advice on this. When you think about this officer who, okay, they've had a target in to spot and assess. They figured out, okay, we think this is the individual in the gang who would be the most recruitable, right? Who has the right access to know what's going on. And they figured out, okay, how am I going to, how's this officer accidentally going to meet them, right? And start the conversation. And then you think about getting that second date. Like, they're not making the pitch in at the bump. They're like, this is just, this is just like our first contact, right? When you think about getting that second date, helping an officer like get to this point of like knowing how to improv at the time well enough, have some game plans, but know how to improv. Somebody on the show, a different intelligence officer said, well, everybody's got stress, Jess, like everybody's got problems. They're people have problems. And so that second date needs to be about their problem. Like, you got to have a good what's in it for them factor.
I was just going to say what's in it for them.
But when you think about that exact scenario, okay, it's MS-13, it's Russian mafia, maybe in Brighton Beach or something like this, right? Whoever this is, when you think about, we accidentally got into each other, we accidentally bumped into each other, a conversation started, it's going well, and now you need to teach an officer how to get them to a second meeting. What are some principles? What are some ideas? Anything there?
So a lot of times we would meet people and the fig leaf, like the thing that you would claim, like this is all about patriotism. It's all about doing the right thing. It's all about saving kids. But oftentimes that was really just how to make them feel more justified. But in reality, for a lot of them, it was about money. And they just didn't want to feel dirty. So we would fig leaf it with, it's about nationalism and some, bigger, grander thing. But other times it would be about their kids and their families and their spouses and whatever. So we would leverage medical. So this is where intelligence about the person's extended family is really important. We would find out that they had an elderly mom or dad that were living in a bad way. And it was like, hey, I saw you, and you have to obviously weave it in because you can't let them know you're spying on them and stuff. So you only can have the information that you have. But the effort is to try to find out, can you help their kids? Can you help their spouses? Can you help their extended family, their mom, their dad? I mean, a lot of these people grew up and got in the game early on so that they could pay for extended family and obligations. Medical's a big one, because, most of them don't have medical coverage. And then you find out that their kid has diabetes, or they've got a medical issue, or they've got a problem, or a brother that's in jail and needs to get a word to them. Anything like that. Like, family is big. And, particularly in the cartels, we saw it in clans, we saw it in tribes. So if you could leverage some kind of potential Benny of like, hey, I noticed X, Y, and Z, let me get more information and let's meet back up and I'll see what I can do about your kid's school situation. Or I saw that your kid got into a little bit of trouble, let me take a look at it and let you know if I can help out. Now you can't offer anything that you can't do from a legal perspective. But if you can find out like, hey, my brother is in this jail, like what's the status? If it's information that you can give them, give a little, get a little. If you can give them intelligence that they can't get, but is not, anything like classified or that you're not allowed to give, like that's a benefit. So you've got to find out what's in it for them, and what's truly driving them. And usually that's layers of motivation. People always want to seem honorable, but a lot of times it also just comes down to money. So it is challenging, but you have got to be a listener. You've got to listen to what they're saying and the nuance of what they're saying, and never walk into a date before doing your due diligence.
That's solid advice. Well, this has been so fun. What are all the websites we can send people today?
So for those of you who are seeking to get on any kind of, on the journey to learn a little bit more about mental health, about positive and negative patterns, managing emotional dysregulation, our rewilding retreats are located on mustangmedicine.com. You'll learn all about our methodology. We utilize multi-modes. Yoga, sweat lodges, holotropic breath work, cold plunging. We learn about the nervous system, and then we also learn about the emotional side of resiliency. And so it's a really amazing retreat. So they can check us out at mustangmedicine.com. If they want to go see the movie, it's called Homestead. It is in theaters around the country right now under Angel Studios. And the book is called Black Autumn. You can pick it up on Amazon and Audible. You can listen to it. It's a great series. So it'd be awesome to drive people to go. It's a great, winter read when you're sitting at home, stuck inside. But other than that, for all of you, recovering type AAA, overachieving, people-pleasing executives, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. You can be successful in business and still have a good home life and bring it all together. It just sometimes takes a little bit of time to find out how to do that. And I'd be happy to one day talk more about that process. So
I love it. Well, I just want to say another big thank you from us at Child Rescue for all the great advice you've given us in previous meetings and today here.
It's a great program. I mean, law enforcement, boots on the ground guys, that's where you get all your intel. I mean, it was something we talked to the FBI all the time about, is like your best recruits are going to be the cops who can then get the best recruits. And so work with your local PD. That's the key.
I love it. Okay. Thanks again for doing this.
Thank you. Talk soon.
Okay. Bye, everyone.